It's Adam here for PC Monitors, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the OSD on-screen display menu system of the LG UltraGear 24GQ50F or 24GQ50F-B if you want to be a little bit more complete with the model code. The OSD is controlled by a joystick which faces downwards in the central region of the bottom bezel, or beneath the bottom bezel in the central region. If you twiddle the joystick left or right when you're not in the main menu system, you can change the volume of anything connected to the 3.5mm jack or mute the volume. Note that this monitor does not include integrated speakers. If you twiddle the joystick up or down, you can quickly adjust the brightness. And if you press the joystick in, you get this little radial quick menu. And there are two little quick settings here. I've got it set to response time if I now press left and game time if I press right. If you press the joystick again, then you go to settings, which is the central option. I then go to general. It has user-defined key 1 and user-defined key 2, so that's what I was just referring to. So the user-defined key 1 I've got currently set to response time, and key 2 currently set to game mode, but you can see you can set it to input, crosshair or black stabilizer if you prefer as well. And there's also FPS Counter as another option there. And if you go into the main menu and then twiddle the joystick up, you can power the monitor off. There's a power off option. Alternatively, if you hold the joystick in for a few seconds, it powers the monitor off as well. When you turn the monitor on, there isn't a power LED on this monitor to indicate the power status. So when you turn it on, it will give you a little beep, which LG refers to as a buzzer. And if you find that beep annoying, you don't want it to do that, then you can go into the settings, so the main menu, and you'll find it under General Buzzer, and you can just turn that off. So the first section of the main menu, game mode, you'll see at the top there's also a little quick indication of your refresh rate, the FreeSync status, that's really adaptive sync, whether that's on or off in the OSD, and I'll come to that when I get to it. Whether the 1 millisecond MBR motion blur reduction setting is on or off, response time mode, and DAS mode. So for the game modes, Gamer 1 and Gamer 2, these are the most flexible, and you can change any setting you want here. Nothing's grayed out. You'll see that 1 millisecond motion blur reduction is grayed out. I'll come on to that shortly, but that's just because I've got FreeSync Premium enabled in the OSD. But everything else, it's available to adjust according to your preferences, and I'll come on to these exact adjustments shortly. Gamer 2 is the same. FPS, this makes its own adjustments, and some of it will be grayed out, so you see you can't adjust the sharpness, the gamma, color temperature, or the color channels. So you're quite restricted. You can adjust the brightness, but I don't see a reason to use the FPS mode. If you like how it looks by default and you don't really want to change much, then that's fine. Feel free to use it. It's designed to give a bit of a competitive edge, so it is designed to give good visibility for darker shades, but things tend to look a bit washed out overall, so you can make various adjustments with Gamer 1 and Gamer 2 that will be the same if you want to have a competitive edge anyway. RTS makes different adjustments and again blocks off various controls. The vivid mode causes some oversaturation, but to be completely honest, it also gives a very cool tint, and again it restricts the options you can change. It also grays out the response time. I'm not sure if the FPS mode and RTS did that, I didn't check, or I don't recall seeing that, no. So for some reason the vivid mode blocks off the response time. Anyway, again, there's really no reason to use this unless you really like how it looks and you don't want to change anything. There's reader mode. This is a quite light actually, or quite ineffective low blue light setting. I explore this more in the written review. It also massively reduces the contrast on purpose, so things look really flooded. That's intentional. It's below 100:1, the static contrast ratio using this setting, as I recorded. Again, explored more in the written review. So I would again recommend using Gamer 1 or Gamer 2 and making your own adjustments. Next is Game Adjust. FreeSync Premium, so that controls adaptive sync on the monitor, on or off. If you set this to off, it means you can activate the 1 millisecond motion blur reduction setting. I'm not going to do this because all you'll see in the video is a bit of flickering. This is all explored in the review. It's a strobe backlight setting. And I'm using an NVIDIA GPU, so I'm not actually using AMD FreeSync Premium technically. So as I said, this is actually just an adaptive sync toggle. So if you want to use NVIDIA's G-Sync compatible mode, you have to have FreeSync Premium set to on in the OSD here. Next, you've got black stabilizer. 50 is the correct neutral position. And with this, you get the maximum contrast. Things look as they should in terms of the gamma handling, more or less as they should. The gamma calibration can vary a bit between units, but mine was pretty good. Anyway, 50 is the correct default setting. If you increase this, I'm just going to use the shortcut key, it's a bit easy to get it back. So if you increase this, then you will lose static contrast. So I can see black, so the pure black in the background there. This is the Lagom black levels test, by the way, on lagom.nl, the website. That raises, so you do lose contrast. I don't really like this setting. It's not as targeted as I've seen from similar settings on other monitors I've tested, from other manufacturers, admittedly. So even if you set this just one up to 55, yes, you do gain a competitive edge, which can be useful, but you also lose the contrast, which is something which you might want to avoid. And also be aware that what you see here in terms of how blended the blocks are in the video, that's not what you'll see to the eye. It's different to the eye. I explore this particular test using my test settings in the written review if you're interested. If you decrease this, actually we'll just use the shortcut because it takes up less of the screen. If you decrease this, it starts crushing things together. Things look more sort of contrasty, although it doesn't actually increase your contrast because the black point and white point isn't changing. It's just changing the gamma. So you can set this according to your preferences, but 50 is the correct neutral point. If for some reason 50 looks wrong and you note when you change this, things look more correct or clearly more correct, it's probably because your color signal is incorrect. And there's an article on the website exploring the color signal. There's also a setting on this monitor related to that if you're using HDMI called HDMI black level. I'm actually using DisplayPort at the moment, so that's grayed out, but you'll find it in picture adjust. And you have to scroll down a bit more, so it's black level there. It's grayed out because I'm using DisplayPort. I've just quickly switched over to HDMI, so the black level option is now available. You'll see there's high and low. High is the default, and that is the correct setting to use if you are using a full range RGB signal. I do find the way that they label this on LG monitors a bit counterintuitive. You'd think that low means a lower black level, and that's good because it's a higher contrast. Don't take it too literally. Actually read these as full range RGB and limited range RGB, so it depends what signal you're using as to which is correct. But for most people, you want the black level set to high and you want to use a full range RGB signal, and there is guidance about how to do that on your system in the graphics driver on an article which I have linked to in the description of the video, all about correcting the HDMI color signal. This can also apply to DisplayPort in terms of what to do in the graphics driver depending on the refresh rate you're using. So 120 Hz with the native Full HD resolution. That will actually use a limited range RGB signal by default with NVIDIA systems, so you will want to correct that. So just quickly, 144 Hz and 60 Hz in this PC signal list. I'd also have 165 Hz if I was using DisplayPort because that supports 165 Hz on this monitor. If you select something from the first list, which would be 120 Hz, and that is the same via DisplayPort and HDMI. 120 Hz is listed in this way. If you need more guidance, refer to the written review. I talk a little bit more about the resolutions and refresh rates there. Then it will actually default to using a limited range RGB signal. I'll just show you this. So if you press apply, you'll see it says output dynamic range limited. You have to select use NVIDIA color settings and set that to full. That's basically what the article will tell you to do. That's the easiest way to make sure it's giving you a full range RGB signal. Next up, you've got response time. You can set that to off, normal, fast or faster. Explore this in the review. Fast is optimal in my view in most cases. There's an on-screen crosshair function. Just a few designs here, you can't customize it. So there's a little green cross in the middle there. Although they're dot designs and there's red or green. And you can't change the position of these on the screen. So if I use the joystick, it doesn't change the position or anything like that. It simply does the same thing as when the crosshair is not on the screen. So not a lot of flexibility, but a few basic designs if you want to use it, which I do not. FPS counter on or off. This will put some white numbers at the top left of the screen. You can see it says 165, and that will change if you're using adaptive sync and you're within the VRR range. That will change, so you can see it is changing to reflect the frame rate of the content. This isn't specifically showing you the frame rate, it's actually showing you the refresh rate that the monitor's running at. So you'll see, for example, it's actually running the test between 35 and 50 frames a second, but that's not showing 35 and 50, it's showing double those numbers. That's because it's using LFC, explored more in the review, so just be aware of that. But if it's in the main refresh rate range, so let's say your game or content was running at 70 frames a second, when that stabilizes, it will show 70. If you're not using adaptive sync, then this will just show the refresh rate that you've got selected for the monitor. Be aware that you can't have the FPS counter and the crosshair on the screen at the same time. I read it in the manual, so that must be true. If I now go to crosshair and select something here, it turns the FPS counter off. And also, note I've got the crosshair enabled. If I turn the FPS counter on, it turns the crosshair off. There's game reset, which will reset this part of the menu, the game adjust settings, to the factory defaults. Next, you've got picture adjust. You can change the brightness, the contrast, and the sharpness. So the brightness and contrast are your usual single unit increments when you're changing it. Sharpness is in increments of 10. 50 is the neutral point. Gamma mode 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 is the default mode, and that was perfectly fine on my unit, but if you want to change that, you can, and it's explored in the written review, the different gamma modes. There's color temp. You can set that to custom, which allows you to change the red, green, and blue color channels manually. Warm, medium, cool, or manual. So warm is somewhat warmer than the factory defaults. It's not super warm in terms of its tone, but it's certainly warmer than the factory defaults, which is actually a bit on the cool side. There's medium, which is sort of close to the factory defaults. I think actually it was exactly the same as the factory defaults on my unit. And cool, which is a bit cool, as it suggests. So that's a high white point. Or there's manual, which just allows you to nudge it over to a warm color temperature or a cool color temperature, depending on your preferences, down to W8 and up to C10. A bit random, but that's what they've done there. There's also 6 color control. Even if you have the color temperature set to something other than custom, you can access this. And this allows you to adjust the hue and saturation for red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow. Most people won't want to fiddle around with these, particularly the hue control. That sort of just skews the image one way or the other. But if you like to fine-tune these things, you can. And the saturation, again, if you like to fine-tune things, you can. I think maybe I'll play with yellow here to give you a better example of what this might do. So you can selectively increase the saturation of various channels or decrease the saturation. Be aware that when you're increasing the saturation, you're not changing the color gamut. So the most saturated shades remain the same. You're just pulling things closer to the edge of the gamut, so they do become more saturated than they should be. And in doing so, you lose shade variety. So be careful with these adjustments. But if you like to use them, feel free. And if you decrease the saturation, as you'll notice, things can eventually become completely black or white if you decrease the saturation of all of the channels. But I've just done yellow, so it's basically selectively taken out all of the yellows. The other shades remain. So quite a lot of flexibility there. Next, you've got DFC, Digital Fine Content, I think it refers to. That's supposed to be a sort of very gentle dynamic contrast setting, as I understand it. To be honest, if you've got that set to on or off, you might not notice any differences. It might be really dependent on the content you're viewing, but it's supposed to allow the backlight to slightly adjust itself based on the content, but it adjusts as one unit, so it's always going to be a compromise. If you notice these weird shifts, it might be that you've got these DFC enabled, and you should have it disabled for the most consistent experience. To be honest, I haven't really played around with this much, and when I had it on, I didn't really notice much of a shift, so it's a very gentle setting if it is doing anything. And you can reset the picture adjust settings to the factory defaults using picture reset there. Input, so you can select an input manually, HDMI or DisplayPort, HDMI 1, HDMI 2 or DisplayPort. There's an aspect ratio select, so you can enforce a 16:9 or 4:3 aspect ratio. As I have a 16:9 resolution, the full HD resolution, the native resolution, when I select 4:3 it squishes things up. But if you want to use that aspect ratio, perhaps because that makes sense for the resolution you're using, then you can do so there. If you want the monitor to automatically select the input for you, you can do that. And the way it works on this monitor, it seems, is that if you have a new device connected, so you connect it up, it'll then say that the device has been detected, say HDMI input 2 has been detected, would you like to switch over to that? And you can select yes, and then it will do that. If you always want to be manually controlling things and you don't want the monitor to even do that, then just have auto input switch set to off. Next is general. You can change the language that the OSD is displayed in. User-defined keys, which I've gone through. Smart energy saving. This is set to low by default, I believe. This is a gentle dynamic contrast setting. It will adjust the brightness. It's really designed to lower the brightness a bit if predominantly dark content is displayed. So it can cause shifts and inconsistencies in the backlight, which can be annoying, particularly if you've got this set to high. So I would recommend setting that to off if you're finding these shifts annoying. And if you want to save energy, then just reduce the brightness as much as you can bear manually. But aside from that, really most people are going to find this smart energy saving setting a bit annoying. There's deep sleep mode. That allows the monitor to enter a deeper standby state. And if you're noticing it's not waking up properly when your system wakes up, the monitor that is not waking up properly, or perhaps it's not waking up when you're trying to get into your BIOS or something like that, or it's not waking up early enough, then it could be that this setting is causing some issues, so you could turn deep sleep off. It will make a slight difference to the standby power consumption of the monitor if deep sleep mode is set to off versus on. So if you're not having any issues, I would just leave this set to on as I've done, but if you are having issues, then try setting that to off. Automatic standby, the monitor will automatically turn itself off after 4 hours, 6 hours, or 8 hours. Technically it's standby, but it's as if you've used the power off function on the monitor. Buzzer, which I went through earlier. OSD lock, so if you don't want people to accidentally mess around with your OSD, or you don't want to accidentally press it for whatever reason, don't want to mess around with settings, then set that to on. You can see that some of the settings are still available, so I can change the brightness because that's a shortcut key of sorts, and I can change the volume. I can't access response time black equalizer, and if I try and go into settings, most of it's grayed out. So it's a bit of an odd feature, to be honest. It locks off most of the settings or most of the OSD, but you can still access some things. Anyway, that's the setting. Information, so that will give you the total power on time, so how long the monitor's been used in total, how long it's been switched on for in total, and the current resolution and refresh rate. The refresh rate is also displayed there, and as I was showing you with the FPS counter, if you're using adaptive sync, then that will change and will reflect the frame rate of the content. But again, it could be double the frame rate depending on what's going on there. So this one just updates once when you go on information, whereas that will update in real time. And there's an option here to reset to initial settings, so that will reset everything in the OSD to the factory defaults. And I'm going to quickly go through OnScreen Control. This is the software used to control the monitor via your system, and I'll give a link to that in the description of the video as well, how you can download that just from LG's website. And I believe this is, it takes a while to start up sometimes. I've noticed that my system certainly isn't a slow one, so it's just a bit of a janky piece of software in that respect. Still seems to be starting up. Yep, kind of don't know what it's doing there, but I can't use it just yet. There we are. Okay, yep. Took a while, a bit odd. So the first bit here is screen split, so you can adjust multiple windows in various different ways. I'm sure you're very familiar with how this kind of thing works. But what I've done is I've got two windows open. Very, very boring identical content there, but just to show you how the splits work. It will then just rearrange them into various different orientations, and if you've got more than two windows selected, some of these will have room for 3 windows or multiple windows. So that can be quite useful. There's also PIP, and this is a kind of software-based PIP, and it's not something I've tested. I don't use multiple systems at the same time, so I believe that should give you your subsource in the little box there. if you've got another system connected. And as I said, I'm not sure exactly how this works, so I apologise if this is incorrect. I haven't really tested it myself, but it seems to be a little basic picture-in-picture function, software-based one. If you press Apply All, I believe that will have your preferred option used as the default when you restart your system. I believe that's what it's saying there. And you can also have different applications use different split types. And you can select a monitor that's using the split type depending on what you've got connected up. You can tell I haven't really used this software very much, can't you? Monitor settings, just some basic options here. You can change the picture mode, you can change the brightness, contrast and sharpness. So there's a little bit of a delay. It's not super responsive when you change this, but it's not super slow either. Does the trick if you just want quick control of things like the brightness, contrast, sharpness and the picture mode. There's also color adjust, so there are a few more settings here. You can change the red, green and blue color channels and the gamma mode, the color temperature setting. So that all works as you'd expect. You can change the display orientation as well. You can change the picture mode used for different applications. You have to press My Application Preset, so that's on. And if you press Edit, you can add further programs to the list. There's game mode settings, so a few more settings that you can adjust here. So there's a response time setting. You can enable adaptive sync or disable adaptive sync, and there's black stabilizer as well. There's also a few more things. So there's an option to find the mouse pointer by using the control key. So if you have this selected, you can press Control and it will do that, so you can see where your mouse cursor is on the screen in case you happen to lose it. You can switch over to 5:9 mode, so that's interesting. Again, I'm not super experienced with these, as you can tell. And there's settings, so you can set the application to auto start or not auto start with Windows, auto update, adjust the font size if you're finding it difficult to read. Okay, that just opens up your system settings for that. Switch to gaming UI, so that just gives everything a different look if you prefer this kind of look to things. And in a way, this is actually a bit better because it has all of the things you can change all in one place. So it's a little bit neater, in my opinion. A bit more efficient, actually. But the functionality is the same, it's just it's displayed in a different way. Or you can switch back to the classic UI by going in settings, if that's what you prefer. And also in the system tray, if you right-click the icon, there are a few little options there, such as monitor select, display orientation, and a way of quickly choosing your screen split type. So that's really all there is to the OSD on-screen display menu system of the LG UltraGear 24GQ50F or 24GQ50F-B. Be sure to check out the full review on PCmonitors.info. There's a link to that in the description of the video, alongside information about how you can support the work that we do. Also be aware that liking the video, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, also a nice way of showing your support.